Welcome back to Star Spangled Gamblers. I'm your host, Keen Dog. This is our special guest podcast, and our special guest this week is from, I think I'm supposed to say you're from across the pond. I've got Matt Shattuck here, as well as Pratik. Matt, you want to say hi?
Hello from London.
Hi from London. So we're Yanks. We're taking that word back. We're Yanks. And we're really excited to be introducing ourselves to the British people over there, but we need to get Americans woke to what the UK is so we can get that common cultural vocabulary. So Matt, I'm going to ask you some quick questions and you help my audience get caught up to where you are. We watch a lot of TV. We love the movies in the USA. Everyone in the UK, I think that the available jobs from what I understand are secret agent, broke hot chick in London, soccer player, Harry Potter writer, and Downton Abbey character. Which job do you have?
I would put myself near the secret agent category, King Dog. I'm not sure I quite fit in.
Does that have something to do with stealing information that might give you an advantage in betting on the political outcomes of the British government?
Absolutely not. No, it's all above board here. Nothing secret going on.
So what are you? Who are you? What is Matt Shattuck and Ladbrokes?
Yeah, so Ladbrokes is one of the bigger betting platforms, bookmakers essentially in the UK. It's been going for 100 or so years, and I run their political betting department. So anything election-based, those odds are down to me.
Well, but if you're in the UK, but who's in England?
That's a good question. The people who aren't Scottish and Welsh.
See, we get these questions all the time in the States. I noticed, though, that you're in a white room. Why aren't you in a red telephone booth?
Yeah, they don't have those anymore. No, we moved over to a different technology quite recently.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Brain exploding right now. It's a huge election year in the United States. We don't always understand how British politics work, but when are you electing your next queen?
Not for a very long time, I'm hoping. She's doing a great job. Cool.
Jeremy Corbyn, is she running against her for queen again?
No, we've ditched him. He's gone now.
Got it. Now, you have more betting lines on American politics than most of the American books, frankly. Is your impression watching the news, do you think that the political climate in the United States with racial unrest and a very polarizing president, do you find it more depressing than One Direction's breakup or Hugh Grant's career since Love Actually?
Well, have you seen Paddington 2? That's a great movie. He's in that.
Oh, that is an excellent movie. Shit.
Yeah. One Direction I was fairly indifferent about, but yeah, I'm certainly excited about this election.
There's been some very exciting things coming out of the solo acts of One Direction, so you can't be too sad about it. Last questions that we hear all the time from our readers and our viewers in the United States. In the UK, has the West Lothian question been convincingly answered? Is UK part of the Europe? And is the Church of England still relevant beyond a cultural symbol to the British people?
I'll answer the middle one. I think we've left Europe now. The other two I'm not too sure about.
Okay, well, we're Star Spangled Gamblers. We try and have a little bit of fun when we bet on politics. We like to, when we have guests like you, who are frankly a lot smarter than us, or at least smarter than me, probably not smarter than Pratik, who you'll be hearing from soon. We like to do the old bar argument of would you rather. We're going to give you two terrible bets or two total layup bets, and we want you to tell you which is the better one to take. So we started this conversation talking about the American Vice President, Mike Pence, and I think Pratik has compiled some questions about Pence to hold your feet to the fire about where the future of American politics is headed. So Pratik, do you want to take the blunt here?
Yeah, well, Matt, you posed the question about Mike Pence's chances in 2024, but I think a lot of that will determine or will be determined by what happens with Pence this year. So for the first question, would you rather buy Mike Pence to run for president this year or for the Scottish Parliament to call for a referendum on independence this year?
Yeah, I saw that predicted price on Scotland. Nobody over here is talking about a Scottish parliamentary vote on independence happening this year. That just isn't on the table. There is a Scottish parliamentary election next year. If the SNP get a majority, and that's about a 50% chance, then I think we probably do have a referendum coming up. But this year, I can't see any legislation going through now. No. So I'm going to go with Pence there.
You actually might not believe this, but we hear from readers all the time about Scottish election referendum. I think people in the States just think all the Scots do is call for independence referendums. I mean, I'm assuming they do other business there.
I'm all in favour of referendums, especially the Scottish ones. The last one was a massive betting heat, and we won a few quid. So I hope they have another one soon.
This actually isn't a joke. No one's ever really explained to me what a quid is. Well, but let's keep talking about Mike Pence though. You asked us what we think the odds of Pence being the president in 2024 are. What did you wind up putting the odds at? Like, I think it's ridiculously remote. But what are your odds at Ladbrokes?
Yeah, I mean, he's only 8-1 to win the 2024 election. And the reason I asked you the question, guys, was we've taken so much money on him at 8-1. I wondered if I'd missed something. There was some route I wasn't familiar with, some little constitutional backdoor. But I don't think there is, right? I don't understand why anyone would take that price. It's about 12 cents in predicted terms. I'd want a lot better than that.
So I don't know if I would take it at that price, but it isn't like completely ridiculous to me. And I think here's the argument that I would make for it. I think number one, there's actually not a bad possibility that Pence could simply become the president. And that could happen basically. If you look at Donald Trump's health, it isn't particularly good. I mean, I think you could see some kind of an incident happen even as early as this year. Obviously, if Trump gets reelected, that gives you Pence 4 more years to become president in a variety of different ways, everything from impeachment to Trump being incapacitated. But even if you figure that Trump loses this time around, and I think he will, Pence is going to be in a pretty good position, I think, to consolidate support within the Republican Party. By all accounts, I think he's emerged as a relatively sane voice in the administration. He'll have the party establishment behind him. And it's not obvious that there are many figures in conservative or Republican politics who have the ability and ideological bandwidth to be able to unite all the different factions. So
I'm totally on the other side of this. Like, I think the only memorable thing Mike Pence has done since becoming vice president is stand in the Rose Garden with Conan, the terrorist killing dog, and pat it while Donald Trump talks. I feel like he's been totally neutered and deballed by the Trump presidency, and is a politician who's been falling upward through the Republican Party for years. I think when Trump, I think he's a nothing in the future.
Let me ask you two guys a question. I mean, the conventional wisdom is that if Biden wins, there's almost no chance he'll get as far as being re-elected for a second term. But what price would you take if you wanted to back Biden to win in 24, assuming he wins 2020? What do you think he'll be, or what would you want before you backed him?
So to me, that question comes down almost entirely to what Biden's health will be like. I actually think for all the talk of polarization and so forth in America, I mean, I think if Biden wins and he wins by a comfortable margin, which is what I think will happen, I think he'll have every incentive to govern as a relative centrist with a broad coalition of both Republicans and Democrats on the Hill. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. I think number one is the fact that as a country, we're going to take a step back from partisanship. I think everyone is going to kind of recognize after the Trump years that we need to scale back the culture wars a little bit. But the other issue is that I think the far left of the Democratic Party is going to be as formidable of a problem for Biden as people on the other side of the aisle are. So I could see Biden being a unifying president who doesn't rock the boat too much. And he may very well be in a good position to run for re-election, as incumbents usually are.
I also just think that, like, no one, who wants to give up the job? Like, who in the history of, rare, we remember the names of people who voluntarily gave up power. They're very rare. There's Cincinnatus and there's George Washington in the States. It's not often that you have people that once they get power just want to walk away from it. It's sort of against human nature.
Yeah, I mean, the implied odds at the moment, according to Ladbrokes 2024 betting, would suggest he'd be a minimum of 3-1 to be re-elected should he win. So 25% chance. I don't know. Seems like I've seen worse 3-1 shots.
You know what? I'm going to go conspiracy theory on here. Like, bring in the black helicopters, land them on the roof. Biden runs for re-election in 2024 and just resigns like a year later and passes it off to the whatever vice president that meets the right cultural strictures that are on his coattails.
Yeah, I mean, you figure too that it would be a tempting option for him, especially if he ends up going with a highly political VP pick who may not be up to the job. Also, I mean, who knows who the Republicans would nominate in 2024? I think if Biden feels like the choice is between him getting reelected or someone really on the fringe having a competitive shot at winning, that might provide all the more of a rationale for him to run again.
Shall I give you a couple of names based on who people have been betting for 2024 on the Republican side?
Let's go.
Ted Cruz, 66 to 1. And the other one is a guy called Dan Crenshaw. What can you tell me about him?
Boy, it's like, what can you tell, but how can you tell it in the short way? I think Dan Crenshaw is one of the first kind of modern Republicans that's gotten a little more social media savvy. I think he's got a big future. He seems to know how to communicate with younger audiences, which Republicans struggle with. He seems to know how to communicate with like the cultural elite of the country, which Republicans really aren't good at communicating with. So I would be long Crenshaw and Cruz, frankly. I think Cruz has grown up in the last couple of years from being a total dickhead.
Yeah, well, Crenshaw's 100 to 1, so a 1 cent buy in predicted terms.
Oh yeah, I'd take that all day.
Well, there you go.
I don't know. I think that I think the dominant narrative in the Republican Party is going to be a return to normalcy. And what I think that looks like is someone like Mike Pence being in a strong position. I think that there are a number of Republican governors who have actually done pretty well during the Trump years. I think the two most salient examples are Charlie Baker in Massachusetts and then Larry Hogan in Maryland.
Yeah.
And then let's keep in mind that the rules of the game for getting for Republican primary probably are not going to change too much, where basically you have to do well in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. But all of that will be happening, I think, in a position where evangelicals are not going to have the same kind of clout.
Can I put a name out there?
Yeah.
Here's a name that I don't hear a lot. Rick Scott, former governor of Florida, current senator from Florida. Rich as they come. King's ransom in his pocket.
Another 100 to 1 shot, 1 cent. Haven't seen a lot of money on him yet, though.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like very cliche to say this, but there's so much that's going to happen between now and then. God only knows, right?
There is, I'll just throw out there is another category of people who are sort of Trumpian, but also not totally crazy and actually somewhat competent. I would put in that category.
Are you about to say Tucker Carlson's going to run for president?
Well, we should talk about that. But I was going to say Ron DeSantis in Florida, Tom Cotton, and then Josh Hawley. They've certainly carved out an ideological niche, but I've heard from people that Tucker Carlson is interested in the job, and I don't see in principle why he would not be able to credibly run for president with the kind of platform.
I actually want to redirect this question to Matt. What in the States we have phrases like "as California goes, so goes the nation." I don't know that that's true anymore. Like when now I feel like as Florida goes, so goes the nation seems to be maybe a little bit of a trend. Is there a part of the UK that it's like, well, as Derbyshire goes, so goes the nation, or a real indicator the way we have here?
It kind of moves around like the magnetic North Pole. I mean, this last election in 2019, there was a strip of constituencies across the north of England and the Midlands, which had always been Labour, mostly been Labour, which the Tories managed to win. So a lot of medium-sized towns in ex-coal mining areas, they're the kind of new swing constituencies in Great Britain.
Interesting. Well, then let me put it to you this way. I'm gonna take us back to base. Would you rather bet on Trump to win this election in 2020 or for Boris Johnson or Parliament? I don't really know how the UK works. Parliament, the Prime Minister, Harry Crane, whoever's job it is to call for a general election. Would you rather bet on Trump to win this one in 2020 or for there to be a general election in the UK by the end of 2021?
There's very, very little prospect of there being a UK general election anytime soon. The next one's scheduled for 2024. And the Tories have got big majorities. There's no incentive for them to call one. So you have to go with the former of those two choices.
So should we be shorting on predicted Boris Johnson being the next European leader to leave?
Well, that's a slightly different situation because there's a little bit of discontent within the Conservative Party about Boris Johnson. And the Tory Party have been very ruthless in the past, getting people they think are past their sell-by dates. So I'd say there's I think the betting at the moment would say there's about a 25% chance he'd be gone by the end of next year. But in terms of that market, I mean, it's fairly certain that Merkel will have gone by about September next year. So I don't know the prices are far out there.
What is it about Boris Johnson that miffs the Conservatives, other than his hair?
Well, this is mostly down to the COVID situation, where the UK stats are just beyond awful. The highest per capita death rate in the world, way worse than most other comparable European countries. And there's the issue with his advisor, who apparently broke or was seen to have broken the rules on lockdown, which he defended Cummings.
We got a lot of that in this country too.
Yeah, so his approval rating, which had shot up in the early part of this crisis, recent polls have been a lot worse for him.
How are the race riots playing for him, if at all? Are they a factor?
We haven't really seen enough polls to decide that, and I'm not sure that many people see the current Conservative government as being particularly guilty or any worse than any other recent government in this regard. So I think we'll wait and see whether that makes any impact on the current administration.
Do you think? Let me put it another one to you. Do you think it's more likely that we have a female president in this country in 2024, or that the UK decides to rejoin the EU by 2025?
I think it's a 16-1 shot that we rejoin the EU within the next 5 years. So I'm definitely going with female president, because chances are we're going to have a female vice president in place pretty soon, and she'll be a short price, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would see like a 30 to 50% range. I see Pratik leaning in.
Yeah, I will say on the Republican side, one figure who I think is highly overpriced, and I think will be for a long time, is Nikki Haley. I think she is overpriced in all kinds of ways. I think the markets are overpricing the possibility that she'll become Trump's running mate. I think that's not going to happen. But I also think that a lot of people in the political establishment like her. A lot of people who bet on politics and prediction markets like her. And I think they're going to keep her price higher than it should be. But I don't know what constituency she actually has on her own to be able to wage a credible run for president. And I also think that there are a number of scandals surrounding her that the mainstream media hasn't really dug into, but they go back to when she was governor, and they've kind of continued to the present day. So she seems to me like a Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush kind of figure who will just
she's on that Hillary Clinton speaking circuit now. I mean, every weekend she's in front of another, Wall Street, whatever that problem was from Hillary. Nikki Haley's going to have that too, but I don't think Republicans care about that the way that maybe Democratic voters might in a primary.
Have you found she is popular in the UK markets, Matt, or for the 20? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a fair amount of money going on her around sort of impeachment time, when it was vaguely plausible that Trump might be forced out before the election. She was always the sort of number 3 choice behind Pence, as being the number 2 choice, I should say, behind Pence, as being most likely person who might step in. But I can't see there's been a lot of interest in her for 2024 yet.
I will say on a macro level, like betting on U.S. politics seems pretty appealing, because when you talk about all the variables of all the different parties and all the different countries with slightly different systems in Europe, it seems like it requires a lot of knowledge to master kind of odds making on those various places.
Yeah, I think that's totally spot on, actually. I mean, if you're a casual political follower, to get your head around what's happening, let's say Germany, complicated parliamentary system with all sorts of potential coalitions, that's quite hard work. If you've got a nice clear-cut presidential system with 2 runners, that's much more appealing for your average punter. So, yeah, I much prefer France, US with good presidential systems rather than a complicated European parliaments.
How much money would I have to pay you to be a professional Italian politics bettor?
I'd say there's one problem there, is that the Italians are, I think they're legally prohibited from betting on Italian politics. So that tends not to be much of a, not a very lucrative sideline for us. So we tend to leave that alone.
Well, they have a pretty vibrant black market for odds making in that country.
Maybe that's what's happening. Yeah, I don't know.
Have you found that there are typical scenarios where the predicted and Ladbrokes prices tend to be totally off, or have you found that they are pretty correlated for the most part.
I actually think, looking at this election cycle, that PredictIt's been a leading indicator, I would say, especially for things like the vice presidential markets. The news does get picked up earlier by people playing PredictIt than it does over here in Europe. So, quite a profitable strategy is simply to compare what's happening in PredictIt with what's happening on the European exchanges every morning. If there's a big difference, you can probably back it in Europe at a big price and be confident that price will shorten up.
So we talk about bias a lot. Like we talk about how bias influence pricing. Sort of a boring way of phrasing it. What is like the average political bettor in the UK? Like a Ladbrokes politics addict. Like who is that person?
Well, at this stage of an election, so we're talking 5 months out, the vast majority of people who are betting are paying quite a lot of attention to what's going on, right? They're not the casual recreational punter. And so when you get to the days before the election, the liquidity goes up in political betting markets because there's lots more people playing, but the average level of expertise goes down as the casual once every 4 year punter turns up to have a bet on Trump or whatever. Yeah. Having said that, I mean, there's still a noticeable bias towards pro-Trump options, in my opinion, even on the European markets, because there are so many people with a memory of 2016 who think that it's just a given that the polls are probably wrong and underestimating Trump. Trump and Brexit in particular, it's a lot of people that you can ignore the experts, you can ignore the polls. Your feeling is just as good as anything else when you're trying to predict an election. And from a long way out, companies like Ladbrokes could be pretty sure that we are going to end up losing an awful lot of money if Trump is re-elected, and vice versa, if Biden wins, it's going to be a great result.
Yeah. I feel like there's like definitely a middle ground to stake out there where people definitely underreport their support of Trump, but I think it's pretty hard to look at all of the information that's publicly available and conclude that he's anything other than an underdog.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to build in a little bit of social desirability bias in the polls, but based on 2016, that's not a very big amount, maybe 1 or 2% of voters, and he's a long way from being close enough for that to turn it for him.
Yeah. Your audience should know, by the way, we're not, everyone's very fixated on bias. We're not flunkies for liberal politicians. Pradeep and I have both worked inside of Republican administrations or for Republican officials, but we adhere closely to follow the money. That's what we want to do. PJ, should we go into our long short section?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we're just going to give you some big trends, and you're going to tell me if when you see opportunities to bet on them in the marketplace, you take them, or you go long, or you take the short side. Long short, the American Black Lives Matter movement will disrupt European politics as it has American.
I'd be short in the medium to long term. I mean, I think even in America, this is probably going to be, maybe not all that salient by the time we get around to election time. No matter how important it seems right now, during this election campaign, there will be many, many game-changing moments which everyone will have forgotten about by November the 3rd. I'm not saying people will have forgotten about this, but it certainly won't be as important as people probably imagine right now.
Long short, Mitt Romney will endorse Joe Biden for president.
That's a good one. I'd be long, I think. I could see that happening. I don't know what the odds are if anyone has a book on it. But, the level of animosity between him and Trump, I think, could push him that way. One
way to bet on that one would be to bet on whether or not Biden can win Utah. I think you can get that one right now at 10 or 11%. I'm skeptical that Romney will actually come out and endorse Biden, but there are a lot of things he could do short of endorsement to create problems for Trump. And I think if we're really seeing a blue wave, Utah could be in play. So I'm actually going long on Democrats winning Utah, not because I think it'll necessarily happen, but I think at 11 cents, I think there's money to be made there.
Yeah, there were a few people we saw backing the Democrats to win Utah today. And if you think there's going to be a Biden landslide or something similar, then that could be a good state to go with.
By the way, Mike Lee in Utah is... People tend to, lump all these various conservatives into the same pot. But I can't imagine Mike Lee as being a huge Trump fan. I mean, there's few people that are like more kind of constitutional, conservative, rule of law. anti whatever Trump is on the other side of the mirror than Mike Lee. So, I mean, there could be some problems with the organization there backing the president.
Well, so actually, Mike Lee ties into, Matt, your earlier point that kind of your prediction that Black Lives Matter is going to fade out. Alex and I have gone back and forth on this. Why do you think it'll be a non-factor 5 months from now? Do you think Congress will come up with a plan that appeases people, or the protests will fizzle out, or how do you see it resolving?
I don't have anything as well thought out as that, Pratik. My general approach to elections like this, though, is that anything that turns up as being a huge news story several months out, 90% of the time, they end up being either not a factor or a very small factor by the time you get around to election day. And you could think of plenty of examples in 2016. Similarly, in UK elections and referendums recently, the same things happened. I mean, I think you should, just as a punter, as a gambler, the best thing to do is assume these things are going to be unimportant. You'll be wrong every now and then. You know, Hillary Clinton emails turn out to be a big thing. But most of the time, you'll be right by, going against conventional wisdom and opposing any moves based on the latest news.
So I'm going to be too academic when I reply to you, and everyone's going to end this podcast and get bored. But my feeling is, in the United States, whether or not people are in the streets or not, there hasn't ever really been a political outlet like Christianity has organized voters, whether formally or informally, and there's never really been a full answer, like an organizational force to answer that in the States. And maybe my guess about the UK, though, is that the UK has kind of already gone through the transformation where like formal religion has stopped being a motivating force in politics. And maybe a social justice movement would be less meaningful there because there isn't that counterweight on the other side of the cultural spectrum.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the UK is certainly a very secular country. It's almost a non-existent factor in politics over here. I don't know. I think the fact in the UK is the fact that we are so far away from a prospect of any general election right now means that things that are happening now, are almost certainly going to fade into much less importance by the time we get around to being able to vote on it.
Yeah. Okay. Long or short, 3 million people from Hong Kong will immigrate to the UK.
I think I'd sell at 3 million, Alex. I don't know how many will do it. I mean, there's actually quite a lot of enthusiasm for this idea across various parts of the political spectrum. Even on the right, there's a lot of people who think it's a great idea. There's obviously a section of anti-immigrants opinion which isn't going to change their mind about this. But I think there's a fair amount of favourable public opinion for it, but I would be surprised if it's more than a few thousand.
How do you think that would influence politics, by the way, to have, say it's not 3 million, say 500,000 people from Hong Kong become British nationals?
Well, it probably wouldn't have that much effect. If you imagine they would all, that wave of immigrants would probably congregate around a very small number of constituencies, probably urban ones. And even if they were given the right to vote very quickly, because they'd be so concentrated, they probably wouldn't affect more than a few seats, I wouldn't think.
Long or short, Republicans will turn on Trump as we get closer to the election.
I think it'll be short. I mean, obviously we've seen a couple of people, Murkowski, is it, the Senator from Alaska?
Correct.
But, there's so little sign of very many Congress people or senators putting up any resistance. I mean, I don't know what the timetable for primaries and so on is over there. I guess once people have got through their potential primary challenge, inter-party primary challenges, they might feel a little bit more at liberty to criticise him if he looked like he was going down. But I don't see that much sign of it right now.
Pratik, I feel like you have a spicy take on this.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that's the right way to think about it. Once they all get through their primaries, how much, when they have more leeway, will they act differently? I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that has happened under Trump is that the Republican Party has gotten smaller, but also more intensely loyal behind Trump. And I think one of the things that advantages that Trump has is after pulling up an upset in 2016, there's going to be a critical percentage of Republicans who simply don't believe the polls. So I think Trump could be down, 3, 5, even up to 7, 8 points, and people will be in denial about what's actually coming. So I'm inclined to agree with you. I think the Republican Party is simply going to stick it out and get behind him. And I think we'll see a bloodbath in 2016, and then we'll have a reset in the Republican Party.
I think what people like me have to think about in terms of managing liabilities for a company like Ladbrokes, or we already know our liability is going to run into probably millions on Donald Trump. But if the polls stay roughly where they are now, let's say we're a week before the election, Biden's 7-8 points ahead nationally, he's ahead in all the key states. I guess things like 538 will probably say there's a 90% chance Biden wins.
Yeah,
I bet the betting markets are much, much closer than that. I just don't know what price Trump will stop drifting to. I mean, I can't see him being much bigger than sort of 3 or 4 to 1 based on the kind of mood of a huge chunk of the population about how distrustful they are about polls. And, it could be some amazing value backing Biden at that stage.
I mean, I think that the distrust goes deeper too. I mean, I think there's distrust on how the media reports, like just distrust in the class of people who we call experts, which there have been many chapters up in the Trump presidency of them either being wrong or being hypocritical or whatever. I think a lot of people will go down with that ship. But I think we will see more people get into their lifeboats the way, Lisa Murkowski did.
Right.
Let me ask you, Matt. I mean, one question we've been thinking about, historically in American politics, we've had plenty of landslide presidential elections. I mean, Nixon and Reagan being the obvious examples, but even Bill Clinton won by a large margin in '96. Do you think that landslide presidential elections remain a possibility in American politics, or are we just polarized in a way that makes that impossible even with an unpopular incumbent?
I mean, the thing that's amazing to me when you look at, let's say, Trump's approval ratings, I mean, they've been virtually static for 3 years, right? If you look at the difference between approve and disapprove, it's been about 10 points for 3 years. Sometimes it's up a little bit, sometimes it's down a little bit. But compared to, let's say, UK politics, if you look at the approval rating for Boris Johnson or the Conservative Party, it spikes about all over the place to quite a large extent. Whereas nothing that happens to Trump, or he does, seems to make very much difference. Impeachment, Mueller reports, COVID, riots in the streets. It seems unlikely to me that we're going to get a very big change from where we are now in terms of the polls. Perhaps Biden can get to a 10-point lead. I mean, that might be a landslide. I don't know. But yeah, I think I tend to take the sort of latter point you made there, that there seems to be so much polarization and so many people seem to have made up their minds already. That I'd be surprised if things change very much either way from where we are now.
I mean, I keep expecting people to get to a point where they just want to get on with their lives. And to me, if I'm sitting around and I don't follow politics a lot and I've got a 2-bedroom, 2-car garage house in the suburbs of Dallas or Chicago or whatever, if voting for Joe Biden is the way that I just get on with my life because I'm just tired of all the noise, that seems like a really low price for me to pay. I don't think this election is going to be close right now. Maybe I'll eat those words later, but right now I don't think it's going to be a close one.
I think I go back and forth on this because on the one hand, I think the markets are underestimating the probability of a major Democratic sweep in Congress also. I mean, I think right now we're at a coin flip for the Senate going to the Democrats. I think the odds are considerably higher. And I think even people who look safe right now, like McConnell and Graham, they'll probably eke it out, but I think they may be underpriced. But the difficulty I'm having with a total landslide scenario, like a 48, 49 state situation, is that when you go back to those periods, the U.S. is a much more diverse place today. And I think what Trump has tapped into is the fact that white voters do have a certain racial consciousness. And I think Trump, we don't like to talk about that stuff overtly. But there is a critical segment, I think, of white Americans in particular who view Trump as sort of an ethnic or racial candidate. Yeah. And it's a bizarre thing to say, but I think that for that reason alone, there are probably limits on how much they may defend.
He he invented white identity politics, or at least he organized it. I don't know that white voters voted or thought or behaved that way before him. And I think that's an astute point. We've only got a couple minutes left. We want to ask you one big zinger that would make our lives way better. Are you long or short, Matt, on political gambling being as deregulated and open access in the States as it is in the UK?
I'm short about it ever getting, or at least anytime soon, getting to the fairly liberalised position we have in the UK. When I am hopeful that at least one state somewhere might allow it before November, but I don't know anything. I don't have any inside information on that one way or the other. I mean, what I can say is there are hundreds of millions of dollars, I imagine, possibly more, waiting to be bet on this election by people in the US who, if they don't know about Predict It, are never going to be able to place illegal bets. And this is ginormous amounts of taxable turnover that states could have. So, well, a bit bemused, really. I mean, I don't know what the main objection is. Is it something to do with potential compromising of the democratic process? I don't know.
Well, to use a British term, I think we still have some blue laws here in the States too. Some morality codes and such. But we would love for you to come colonize.
Well, I was going to ask actually on that, does Ladbrokes plan to do any lobbying or PR to try to break into the American market?
I don't think so. No, I think we'd rather just leave it up to the American political process to work itself out. So I don't know that we're putting any overt... I know there's no overt pressure for that going on. Certainly not while states are legalizing sports betting, which, let's face it, is 100 times bigger than political betting. I think we'll wait for that process to work itself out first.
Well, we got the boys ready here on Star Spangled Gamblers. You put us to work. We'll mobilize. We'll write some awesome press releases and give some stirring speeches underneath the statue of Abraham Lincoln. Like, we're ready to go.
I'll be in touch. It'll be great.
You've been great, Matt. This has been a treat for us. We got Matt Shattuck from Ladbrokes Politics in the UK. I got my ride or die Pratik. If you want to say goodbye. And I'm Keen Dog. This is Star Spangled Gamblers. Check us out, support us, follow us, tell your friends, write a glowing review on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening. Good night, world.